Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. It's 11 p.m. in Israel and in Gaza, where we are seeing potential signs of an escalation in the conflict between Israel and Hamas in the wake of that terror attack that happened 20 days ago now. It left 1,400 Israelis dead. You are looking at live pictures of Gaza, where Israeli airstrikes have intensified over the course of the day and night, with widespread reports of sirens and explosions. The Israeli Defense Forces saying today that they are stepping up their ground operations. Take a listen.
Our ground forces are expanding their ground operations. IDF is operating at all dimensions in order to achieve the goals of the war. We will continue to attack in Gaza and its surroundings, and we keep calling upon the people living in Gaza and its environs that south from there they have better conditions.
Now, the IDF did not say that Israeli troops have entered Gaza, though it is worth noting that Israeli tanks have temporarily entered Gaza twice in the last 2 days. All of this while the fate of the 229 hostages still being held by Hamas in Gaza is largely unknown. Back-channel negotiations by diplomats are ongoing in the midst of near-constant conflict. Just a few hours ago, repeated explosions were seen near the Israel-Gaza border, a few miles away on the ground in Gaza near total darkness that was interrupted only by flashes from the airstrikes. You're looking at video that was shot just a few minutes ago. There's currently no internet or cell phone service. The Red Crescent, that's an aid organization, tells NBC News that it is unable to contact its operations in Gaza. The situation in Gaza has been compounded by rising tensions all across the region and fears that this conflict may widen. Earlier today, U.S. forces carried out airstrikes on 2 facilities used by Iranian forces in eastern Syria. Those strikes were in retaliation for what has been near daily drone attacks on American forces. Joining us now, my colleague, NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez in Ashdod, Israel, and former Israeli ambassador to the United States and member of the Knesset, Michael Oren, is back with us. Raf, I start with you. What is happening?
Well, Nicole, as you know, we've been on the ground here for weeks covering first the terrorist attack inside Israel on October 7th, and in the weeks since then, Israel's air campaign inside of Gaza. I can tell you tonight has felt different. It started with just absolutely thundering, intensive Israeli airstrikes inside the Gaza Strip. You may be able to hear them continuing behind me now. Anecdotally, we could tell that they were much heavier than they were before. And then in the hours that followed, as we were texting people inside of Gaza, our messages were not being responded to. We were unable to reach our own colleagues, our own NBC News crew inside of Gaza. And it became clear that the internet was down, that cell phone service was down. And then a couple of hours ago, the Israeli military spokesman, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, appeared on television. And as you said, he confirmed that Israel was intensifying its air campaign, but he also said the ground campaign was expanding. Now, we don't know exactly what that means. As you mentioned, over the last couple of days, Israeli forces have been operating inside of Gaza. 2 nights ago, a column of Israeli tanks, armored vehicles, entered through the land border. Last night, Israel's equivalent to the Navy SEALs landed by sea on the beach in southern Gaza, where they engaged Hamas there. Both times, Israeli forces came and they went under the cover of darkness. Now, one possibility here, we don't know, but one possibility here is that Israeli forces may enter Gaza and they may stay, that they may try to establish some kind of bridgehead, a staging area for an eventual larger Israeli ground offensive. I should say we've heard nothing so far from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, nothing from the Israeli government. Ultimately, Nicole, it will be a political decision as to whether to go ahead with a large-scale ground offensive. That is not a decision that the generals will make. It is a decision that the democratically elected government will make. It's Shabbat here. You don't typically hear from the Israeli government on Friday night, but we still are waiting for any word. I will just say the ground offensive will have huge implications when it does begin, for both Palestinian civilians inside Gaza and the 220 plus Israeli hostages who are being held there. The death toll, according to the Hamas-run health ministry, is above 7,000. We expect that number will increase when Israeli forces enter on the ground. We expect Israel's focus to be on the northern end of the Gaza Strip. Israel has been urging Palestinian civilians to get out of the north, to head south. We should say, Nicole, even despite those warnings, Palestinian civilians have been killed in the south, too, in strikes in Khan Yunis and in other places. Before we lost contact with our team inside of Gaza, one of the things they were saying to us is nowhere is safe right now. But the other big fear for the families of these Israeli hostages being held by Hamas, by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, by other terror organizations inside Gaza is that the start of the ground offensive will mean the end of negotiations. They fear that whatever delicate back channels are running through Qatar, are running through Egypt, that those negotiations will end when the ground offensive begins. Again, we don't know what is happening exactly inside Gaza. We can't speak to our team. The internet is out. The Israeli military has not announced the start of the ground offensive, but it does appear that expanded Israeli ground operations are underway inside the Gaza Strip. Nicole.
Rob, stay with us. Mr. Ambassador, what can you tell us? Well, first, what can you tell us about what's happening tonight?
I think that the fact that the electricity has been cut off, the cell phone service has been severed, is a good indication that we're about to enter into a critical military ground phase of this operation. Clearly, Israel is not in the business of helping Hamas headquarters communicate or even see its branches, its other units operating throughout the northern Gaza Strip. So this is a pretty good indication that Israel is preparing to move in a significant number. I think that Rafe Sanchez is right in saying that there may be a move to create a sort of a bridgehead, a staging area for strikes within the Gaza Strip. I don't know if the entire military force, we're talking about 360,000 reservists that have been called up. That's in addition to a standing army of well over 100,000. It's close to 500,000 soldiers, women and men. Now, many of them are in the north, preparing for the possibility of Hezbollah intervention in this war. Many of them in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, preparing for some type of unrest there, and there has been significant unrest. I would only disagree with Rafe's report to say that negotiations will end for the hostages. In fact, by moving on the ground, Israel is ramping up the pressure on Hamas. Hamas was negotiating, to the degree it was negotiating at all, for a ceasefire, an open-ended ceasefire, which means essentially that it would have won and literally gotten away with mass murder. And Israel, I don't know, we would not be able to return our population to the border areas. I don't know if life could ever even go on here normally. We lose all of our deterrence power. So ceasefire for Israel is close to an existential issue. It couldn't happen. So that was a non-starter for negotiations. I think that as Hamas becomes increasingly under military pressure, its willingness to talk about the fate of the hostages may actually improve.
Mr. Ambassador, can you speak to the domestic state of mind? Obviously, the families of the hostages, for all that they have been through and are still going through, have a voice, and their voices are heard the world over as they endure this unthinkable horror of worrying about small young children, elderly parents and grandparents and sons and daughters. And our conversations with you and with Raf, it's clear that everyone knows someone who was not just killed, but murdered violently and viciously on October 7th. Can you just take me inside the state of mind of the Israeli public tonight?
Well, I spend my waking hours during the day visiting with the families. Yesterday I visited 3 families of people who have been kidnapped. In one case, a woman whose 2 daughters, 8 and 15, are in captivity. They know nothing about their fate. Red Cross has not been able to reach them. Hamas won't let any information about them get out. And for them, it's just unending night, torture night. And there's no good solution here, Nicole. You have to understand there's only bad and very bad and truly terrible. And Hamas has had 2 Israeli hostages for close to 9 years. It has the bodies of 2 soldiers who were killed in 2014 and won't release the bodies. And so even if in some world, some universe, you could say we could have a pause in the fighting and Hamas would negotiate, there's just no guarantee that Hamas would ever negotiate. Hamas wants these hostages as human shields. It wants its own population as human shields. We now know definitively, I've known for a long time, that Hamas's main headquarters is located under the largest hospital in Gaza, under the Shifa hospital. And that in and around that hospital, there are 30,000 Palestinian civilians who are not fleeing to the south and are being held there literally at gunpoint from fleeing because they want to use, Hamas wants to use its own population as human shields. It's all about survival. And they don't care who gets killed in the process. So I think the main hope we have for the hostages is that Israel would ramp up the military pressure on Hamas, create a situation where Hamas can negotiate maybe for its survival in some way. Though I don't think that the Israelis are particularly interested in Hamas survival, to say the least. And then get to a point where our special forces and our intelligence can locate the hostage, which is the major, major challenge here. We had a hostage named Gilad Shalit who was 5 years in captivity in Gaza. We couldn't locate him at all. It's very difficult because they have this vast labyrinth of tunnels and bunkers underground. It's the whole city underneath Gaza City. And one of the released hostages, one of the elderly citizens who were released, talked about being led through this like spider webs of tunnels. We're going to have to go down into those tunnels. And it's going to be very complicate the military operation because in another situation, you could say you would flood the tunnels, you could put fire down the halls. You can't do it because the hostages are down there. We have special forces who are trained to do this. It is one of the most dangerous duties in the U.S., in the Israeli army, the highest level of casualties, people who actually go into these tunnels. But we're really going to have no choice. And this whole operation is about no choice. Simple as that. It's either do this or as a state, I don't know if we can survive.
You know, Raf, it gets to sort of a strategic piece of this, that Hamas right now controls the fate of its civilian population. NBC News moved this story today along the lines of what Ambassador Oren's talking about, that says IDF says there's a terrorist headquarters under Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. Hamas denies it, but basically reporting out what he's talking about, that the civilian population is used. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made that point on every stop in the region and stateside as well. So the fate of the innocent civilian population in Gaza is in Hamas's hands, as is the fate of the innocent Israeli hostages. It seems that at a strategic level as well, Israel is facing pressure on both those fronts. Can you talk a little bit about the debate, to the degree there is one, inside the government?
Yeah, I think, Nicole, there are a number of clocks ticking all at once as Israeli decision makers from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on down decide about the timing of this ground offensive. So on the one hand, the longer they wait, the more time for negotiations. You heard Ambassador Oren's point. Potentially military pressure increases the likelihood of negotiations. I can tell you, we've been speaking to families outside the defense ministry in Tel Aviv. They are convinced that if the ground invasion begins, that will mean the end of negotiations. It's not clear. We will see what happens. But the longer Israel holds off, the potential more time for negotiations. The longer Israel holds off going in on the ground, the more time for the Israeli Air Force to keep pounding both Hamas and on the surface, but also those Hamas tunnel networks underground. And also, as the ambassador was saying, you have 360,000 reservists in uniform, many of whom are ordinary men and women who completed their mandatory military service years ago. They haven't been involved in combat in a long time. They are facing potentially just harrowing urban warfare inside of Gaza City, to say nothing of how harrowing it will be for the Palestinian civilians. So every day that goes by, more time to prepare for that. But on the other hand, every day of delay potentially comes at a cost as far as the Israeli government is concerned. They know that the further we get from October 7th, from the Hamas terrorist attack, the more the memory of that day will fade, the more global attention will turn to the unfolding humanitarian disaster inside of Gaza, to the spiraling civilian death toll inside of Gaza. The Israeli government knows that pressure internationally for a ceasefire may build the longer they wait. And also, Nicole, there's just the question of how long this nation can stay on this level of war footing. How long can you have 360,000 people away from their jobs, away from the hospitals they work in, the high-tech companies that they work in? And then just how long will the Israeli public agree to wait in limbo, not knowing if and when this ground invasion is going? So it is just an unbelievably complicated set of factors that Prime Minister Netanyahu is taking into account as he makes this decision. I will say, Nicole, just to mine his personal biography for a second, for clues here, Netanyahu is a former commando himself. He was wounded in 1972 in a hostage rescue mission. His older brother was killed in Entebbe, Uganda, rescuing Israeli hostages on the far side of the world there, one of the great triumphs of Israeli history. There are very few glorious outcomes, as it were, when we look at this hostage situation. It is very likely these hostages are spread throughout this tunnel network underneath Gaza City. I don't think anyone thinks that there is going to be some happy rescue here where the hostages will emerge into the sunlight. The question is, how many can you get out through negotiation? How many can you get out through military operations? And it's something that these families outside the defense ministry every day are very, very anxiously waiting to hear. Nicole.
Rav Sanchez, we know you stayed up late to talk to us. We want to let you go to do more reporting. Please just put up a hand and we'll zoom right back to you. Thank you so much for your incredible reporting on this really important night. We're really grateful. Ambassador Oren, I want to give you the last word. Just tell us what else is on your mind, what your calls are like tonight, what you think we are, if you think we're on the precipice of a new phase of this. Explain that to us, what we're about to see.
Well, I just want to add to that excellent report. I think, first of all, I give you very high marks. The reporting here is really, truly very good and accurate. Let's keep in mind, don't let the books behind you fool you. I'm in a bomb shelter here. We've been hit by successive barrages in South Tel Aviv today. Much of Israel is in bomb shelters. My kids, my grandkids are in bomb shelters. Schools will be called off. The country is half paralyzed, and even more than half as the rocket fire intensifies. And we have to always mention that it's not just what's going on in Gaza. It's also going on throughout the state of Israel. We've had rockets now fired at us from Yemen, from Houthi Iranian-backed rebels in Yemen. America is engaging tonight in hostilities, firing back at Iranian-backed militias who have been shooting at a U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria. The possibility for a wider conflict is very real. We always say, how wars begin, we never know how they end. And I can think of several scenarios in which this war does widen, certainly to include Hezbollah in the north. I think I've said on this program before, and I'm one of a group of Israelis who think that maybe we should have contained Hamas first and focused on Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is many times the force of Hamas, and Hamas is not going anywhere. But be it as may, the decision was made to move in on Hamas first and perhaps deter Hezbollah, perhaps. But we don't know. And in Israel, I think if I had to define the feeling here, it's one, first of all, of relief. We've gone through 3 weeks of unbearable stress, tension, and sorrow. And finally, the army is moving into action. So there's that relief. But at the same time, Nicole, there's tremendous fear because we know that this operation does it very costly. We're deeply, deeply concerned about the fate of the hostages, and we don't know where this war is going. So we're braced. We're braced for a very difficult period.
Ambassador Michael Oren, I appreciate everything that you say, but I appreciate you not getting ahead of the moment. You're really gracious to stay up and talk to us tonight. Please come back if things develop and events warrant. Thank you very much. Thank you.